My mother told me, "I wish you were never born," because I refused to give her my salary, raise my siblings, and fund her lifestyle, so I told her, "Consider me dead," cut contact, and what followed was absolute chaos. I grew up in a house where everything came with strings. Nothing was ever free, especially not affection. My mom wasn't physically abusive or anything obvious like that, but love was very conditional. If you were useful, things were calm. If you weren't, the atmosphere shifted. Praise only showed up when it benefited her. Privacy didn't exist. She opened my mail, tracked where I went, and always knew how much money I had, even when I didn't tell her. From a young age, I was labeled the strong one, the responsible one, the one who could handle more. She said I wasn't like my siblings, that I was built differently, that I wouldn't abandon her. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. Now I see it was more like a job description. I started contributing financially as soon as I had income. It wasn't framed as a demand. It never is with her. It was framed as common sense. Of course I'd help. Of course I'd cover this bill. Of course I'd step in when things were tight. Over time, that became the default. I paid for things quietly. Groceries, school stuff, utilities. She still presented herself to everyone else as the one holding everything together. The important part is that she never asked directly. She set things up so that if I didn't step in, something would fall apart and it would somehow be my fault. If I hesitated, she'd talk about stress, sacrifice, how tired she was. Eventually, I stopped questioning it. Recently, I got a raise. I didn't announce it. I didn't tell her. Somehow, she already knew. Not just that it happened, but the exact amount. When I got home, she was already talking about changes she wanted to make, quitting a side job, upgrading things around the house. It was all said casually, like the decision had already been made. I told her no, not angrily, not emotionally. I said I wasn't going to keep doing this full time. I said I'd still help in real emergencies, but I wasn't going to fund her life or raise my siblings financially. That was it. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very calmly, that she wished I had never been born. Not in the heat of an argument. Not as an insult. That was the moment something snapped for me. I told her I was done. I told her to consider me dead and that I was cutting contact. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't argue. She just said I'd be back, that people always come back. I packed documents, not clothes. I stopped all payments that same day. I blocked her number and left. What's bothering me isn't just what she said, it's how normal it felt to her. There was no panic in her voice, no fear of losing me. It was like she genuinely believed I was temporary, like my independence was a phase she'd wait out. I expected the fallout to be loud. I thought there'd be angry calls, relatives blowing up my phone, guilt trips. None of that happened. The silence was immediate and complete. No messages, no pressure, no one asking me to reconsider. That silence is why I'm posting. I've started to realize how much of my role in that house was invisible to everyone else. My siblings didn't even know how much I was covering. They thought my mom was managing everything herself. Looking back, I don't think that was an accident. I think she needed them to see her as the center and me as a resource she controlled. I'm not confused about my boundary. I know I can't go back to that. What I'm confused about is her reaction. The calm, the certainty, the way she didn't chase me at all. It feels less like I walked away from a relationship and more like I stepped out of a system that's already adjusting to replace me. And that scares me more than if she'd just screamed. I don't feel guilty for saying no. I feel unsettled by how easily she accepted it, like she'd already planned for me failing to escape or for being written off if I did. I don't know what happens next. I just know this doesn't feel over, even though I've cut contact completely. And I don't know if I'm missing something obvious or if this is just what happens when you stop being useful to someone who only ever valued you for that. Update 1. After I cut contact, I braced for the usual stuff. Angry messages, relatives calling to mediate, someone telling me I'd gone too far and needed to be the bigger person. None of that happened. Days passed, then weeks. Nothing. No missed calls, no random emails, no third-party check-ins. It was like I'd stepped out of the picture and the frame adjusted instantly. At first, I thought maybe she was actually respecting the boundary. That idea didn't last long. The first crack came through one of my siblings. Not in a confrontational way, just confusion. They mentioned, almost casually, that things felt different at home. My mom wasn't upset. She wasn't spiraling. She was acting lighter, less tense, almost relieved. That alone made my stomach drop. Apparently, she had started telling people that I was never reliable to begin with, that she'd been carrying everything on her own for years and was finally free from the stress of depending on me. It was said matter-of-factly, like a correction to a record that had been wrong for a long time. I didn't even know how to react to that. For years, I'd quietly covered gaps so things didn't fall apart. Now, overnight, I was being rewritten as dead weight. Then I found out what replaced me. She didn't slow down or scale back. She just shifted the load. Another sibling was suddenly being leaned on the same way I had been. Same expectations, same language. They were being praised for being responsible, for stepping up, for not being like me. The role wasn't gone. It had just changed hands. That's when it hit me that none of this was personal in the way I'd thought. The system didn't collapse when I left. It adjusted. I wasn't the foundation. I was a part. I tried to warn my sibling, carefully. I didn't go in accusing or emotional. I just pointed out patterns. How it starts small. How it's framed as temporary help that slowly becomes obligation. How saying no is treated like betrayal. They listened, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. From their perspective, I was the one who walked away. It was easy to see me as bitter or dramatic. Meanwhile, more things started filtering back to me through other people. Different versions of the story depending on who was listening. To some relatives, I was cruel and heartless for cutting my mother off without warning. To others, I was barely mentioned at all. She acted like I'd never been important, like my absence didn't matter because I hadn't mattered. Those two narratives existed at the same time. I was both the villain and irrelevant. It was unsettling how easily she switched between them. What bothered me most was how intentional it all felt. This wasn't her lashing out. This was her reorganizing. She was cleaning up loose ends, deciding how I would be remembered, and moving forward without me. There was no grief in it, just efficiency. I also realized she hadn't told my siblings the full truth about the money. They didn't know how much I'd been covering. They thought the household was tight because things were just hard in general. She'd kept my contributions invisible, which meant she could erase them just as easily. Looking back, that made sense. If no one knew what I did, no one could question her version of events when I stopped. The weirdest part was that I didn't feel the urge to correct everyone. A few weeks ago, that would have eaten at me. Now, I mostly felt tired. Not sad exactly. Just worn down by how replaceable everything was. I keep thinking about that last interaction before I left. The calmness. The certainty that I'd come back. At the time, I thought it was arrogance or denial. Now I'm starting to think she wasn't worried because she didn't need me specifically. She needed someone. That realization changed how I see my childhood. All those moments where I was singled out as different, stronger, more capable. It wasn't about me. It was about slotting someone into a role that had to be filled. I don't know how long the replacement will last. Maybe my sibling will hold the line longer than I did. Maybe they'll break faster. Either way, I'm starting to understand that the silence wasn't peace. It was just the sound of a machine continuing to run without me. I'm still no contact. I don't regret that, but I'm more unsettled now than I was right after everything happened. It's one thing to be missed or fought over. It's another thing to be swapped out like a part that wore down. I don't feel erased. I feel studied, like she already knew exactly how this would play out and had planned accordingly. And that makes me think there's more to this than I understood when I left. Update 2. This update took me a while to write because it changed how I see pretty much everything that came before it. A lot of people in the comments of my last post said my mom sounded controlling or transactional, and at the time I agreed in a general way. I didn't realize how literal that actually was. The new context didn't come from a big confrontation or a dramatic reveal. It came from a normal conversation with someone I hadn't thought about in years. I ran into a person from my childhood by chance, someone who'd known my family back when I was still a kid. We were catching up, talking about surface-level stuff, and eventually my mom came up. I mentioned casually that we weren't speaking anymore. There was a pause that felt off. Not shock, more like hesitation. They said something along the lines of them always assuming I'd be gone by now. Not in a cruel way, more like it was an obvious outcome they'd expected years ago. When I asked what they meant, they looked uncomfortable and said, "My mom never talked about me as someone who would grow up and move on. She talked about me like I was temporary in one direction or the other. Either I'd fail and need her forever, or I'd leave broken and come crawling back. Staying independent long-term was never part of the picture." That stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. I started thinking back to things I'd brushed off at the time. How any talk of me moving out was always framed as unrealistic or selfish. How independence was treated like a threat. How success was encouraged but only if it stayed close enough to be controlled. Once I started looking, more things lined up. I talked to another relative, then another. Not interrogations, just conversations. Patterns emerged fast. My mom had always talked about sacrifice in a very specific way, not as something she chose, but as something she was owed repayment for. People remembered her saying I owed her for opportunities, for stability, for even existing. Not jokingly, seriously. One person mentioned she used to keep lists, not financial budgets, but mental ones. Who had disappointed her? Who had paid her back? Who still owed? I was always at the top of that list apparently. The one with the biggest balance. That explained a lot of things I'd never been able to articulate. Why praise always came with pressure. Why help was never just help. Why every boundary I tried to set was treated like an attack. I wasn't stepping out of line. I was defaulting on a debt she believed was permanent. I didn't confront her directly. I already knew that wouldn't go anywhere. Instead, something got back to her through someone else, that I'd been asking questions, that I was reframing things. Her response, relayed secondhand, was blunt. She didn't deny any of it. She doubled down. Children exist to repay their parents. That's just how she sees the world. Hearing that didn't make me angry. It made me tired, like a final piece clicking into place. Around the same time, my siblings started noticing things too. The pressure on the one who'd replaced me was increasing. What started as help was becoming expectation. What started as praise was turning into obligation. They didn't connect it to me at first. They just felt the same slow tightening I'd lived with for years. That was when I realized something important. My mom didn't miss me, not as a person. What she missed was the role being filled cleanly and without resistance. When I left, she didn't lose a son. She lost control of an asset and she immediately worked to replace it. Looking back, the comment about wishing I'd never been born hit differently. It wasn't just cruelty or anger, it was frustration, regret that I hadn't stayed where she put me, that I'd grown into someone she couldn't fully own anymore. That realization messed with my head more than the original fight. It meant the version of her I'd hoped might exist, the one who cared underneath all the control, probably never did. Or if she did, it was buried under something she'd built her whole identity around. I'm still no contact. I'm not planning to break that. But I feel like I've crossed a line mentally. I can't unsee this now. I can't go back to thinking this was just about money or stress or a bad argument. This wasn't about a raise. It was about me stepping out of a system that was never meant to let me leave intact. And now that I know that, I'm starting to see new things happening that make me realize this story isn't done shifting yet. Update 3. I thought Update 2 was the last big mental shift I'd have. I was wrong. This one didn't hit all at once. It crept in sideways, through small things that didn't seem connected until they very much were. It started with people treating me differently. Not strangers, people who already knew me. Extended family, old family friends, even someone I'd listed as a professional reference years ago. Nothing openly hostile, just a weird tone shift. Congratulatory comments that didn't feel like congratulations. Praise that somehow wasn't aimed at me. I brushed it off at first. I assumed it was just awkwardness because I'd gone no contact and people didn't know how to act. Then one comment landed wrong enough that I couldn't ignore it. Someone told me I turned out well considering my upbringing, and then immediately followed it with how impressive my mom's sacrifices must have been. Not how proud she was, not how supportive, how much she gave up. Like my life was a return on investment. That phrasing stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing a pattern. Any mention of my job, my independence, my stability, got looped back to her. I wasn't succeeding despite leaving. I was succeeding because of her. Because she'd built me. Because she'd endured so much. Because this was proof she'd done everything right. It was subtle but consistent. The story had shifted. Me cutting contact wasn't framed as abuse or abandonment anymore. It was framed as betrayal, like I'd taken something that belonged to her and walked away with it. What made this worse was realizing she was telling different versions of this to different people. To some, I was cold and ungrateful. To others, I was her greatest achievement who had lost his way. Both versions centered her. Both erased me as a person with agency. I tried to disengage. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped correcting people. I assumed it would die down if I didn't feed it. It didn't. It started affecting real things. A connection I needed went quiet after a casual conversation with a family acquaintance. A neutral reference suddenly felt loaded. Nothing I could point to directly, nothing dramatic enough to call out, just enough friction to notice. That was when it clicked. This wasn't about reconciliation. She wasn't trying to pull me back in emotionally. She was managing the narrative of my life, without me in it. I realized something else around this time that made my stomach drop. She wasn't angry that I'd left. She was offended that I'd left without her permission, that I'd taken the end result of years of control and made it inaccessible to her. My independence didn't represent failure to her. It represented stolen credit. Against my better judgment, I reached out once. Not to argue, not to fix anything. I needed to hear it clearly, without filters or third parties. The conversation was short and cold, no apologies, no emotion, just a blunt explanation of how she saw things. She didn't need me present in her life. She needed what I represented, proof that her suffering meant something, proof that her control worked, proof she hadn't wasted years. That was the moment something finally broke cleanly. I'd spent so long wondering if I was too harsh, too unforgiving, too rigid. Hearing that reframed everything. I wasn't withholding love. I was refusing to be used as evidence. After that, I stopped engaging completely. I didn't defend myself. I didn't clarify stories. I didn't correct assumptions. I let the narrative exist without me participating in it. What surprised me was how unstable it was without a target. People started noticing contradictions on their own, stories that didn't line up, praise that sounded rehearsed, sacrifice that somehow always needed an audience. At the same time, the sibling who'd been pushed into my old role started cracking. I didn't get details directly, but I could see the edges of it. Missed calls, short replies, pressure escalating fast. That's when I understood the final piece. I was never meant to be a son in the way most people mean it. I was meant to be a symbol, a walking receipt, something she could point to and say her suffering had value. Leaving didn't just remove support, it removed meaning. I don't feel vindicated writing this. I don't feel proud. Mostly I feel oddly calm, like I finally stopped arguing with a story that was never about me in the first place. I don't know how this ends yet. I just know I'm not stepping back into a role I never agreed to play. Final update. A few months passed after my last post. I stayed no contact. I didn't check in. I didn't ask questions through other people. I focused on my own life in a very boring way. Work, routine, quiet. For the first time, nothing in my day depended on anticipating someone else's needs or moods. Then things started breaking without me touching anything. The sibling who was pushed into my old position lasted less time than anyone expected. At first, it looked like they were coping. They repeated the same phrases I used to, that it was temporary, that things would calm down, that it was just a rough patch. I recognized all of it immediately, but I didn't intervene. I'd already learned that warnings only work if someone is allowed to believe them. The burnout came fast, faster than it did with me. The financial pressure ramped up, the emotional pressure followed, responsibility that wasn't discussed but was somehow already assumed, praise that vanished the moment it stopped being useful. From what I've heard, the breaking point wasn't dramatic. No big fight, no explosive moment, just exhaustion and a quiet refusal to keep going. They left, reduced contact, then cut it entirely. That should have been the moment where things changed. Instead, the system tried to correct itself. Another sibling was approached. This one said no immediately, no negotiation, no slow slide into obligation, just no. That refusal mattered more than anything I ever did. It proved something important. The dynamic only works when someone agrees to be consumed. After that, things unraveled quickly. Bills went unpaid, plans fell through, extended family who had been very comfortable watching from a distance suddenly didn't want to be involved. The narrative stopped working when there was no success to point to and no child actively holding things together. I didn't hear about most of this directly. It filtered through in fragments, short messages from people who didn't know what they were asking me to fix, vague statements about how hard things had become. The implication that my absence was the missing piece. It wasn't. The one time my mother reached out, it wasn't what people expect in these stories. There was no apology, no anger, no guilt, just confusion. Like she genuinely didn't understand why things weren't functioning anymore. I didn't respond. That wasn't a decision made out of spite. I didn't sit there weighing whether she deserved an answer. I just knew very clearly that any response would put me back into a system that only knows how to survive by taking. Something else happened during all this that I didn't expect. I stopped feeling like I needed closure. I stopped needing her to understand. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head. What replaced it wasn't peace exactly, it was absence. Space where constant tension used to be. Looking back, I can see that I didn't destroy anything. I didn't pull support out from under a stable structure. I stepped away from something that required a person to be drained in order to stand. That's the part people struggle with when they hear this. They want a villain and a hero. They want a confrontation. They want growth arcs and realizations. What actually happened was quieter and more uncomfortable. The family didn't fall apart because I left. It fell apart because no one was left to sacrifice themselves. I don't feel proud of that. I don't feel guilty either. It just is. I'm not angry now. I'm not relieved in a dramatic way. I just live my life without accounting for someone else's expectations. I don't send money. I don't manage crises. I don't represent anyone's suffering or success. I exist without being useful. That's the ending.